The rain hammered against the cobblestones of London as Miss Amelia Hartwell stood beneath the dripping awning of a bookshop, her worn cloak offering little protection from the November chill. Her fingers clutched the last coins in her possession, 3 shillings and 6 pence, all that remained of her pride and her past. Behind her, the weight of society's judgment pressed like iron chains. Before her, the uncertain future loomed, dark as the storm clouds gathering over the Thames. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and as of 3 days prior, entirely without family or fortune. The consumption had taken her mother swiftly, leaving behind only debts and the cold reality that a woman alone possessed no standing in the world of 1847 London. The boarding house where they had lived demanded payment. The modest funeral had consumed what little savings remained, and the creditors, circling like vultures, showed no mercy to grief. "Miss Hartwell?" The voice came from behind, masculine and cultured, edged with an urgency that made her turn despite her better judgment. The gentleman who stood before her was tall, perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair dampened by rain and eyes the color of winter seas. His clothing spoke of wealth, his bearing of privilege, yet something in his expression suggested desperation equal to her own. "Forgive the intrusion," he continued, stepping closer. "My name is Lord Julian Ashford. I find myself in need of assistance, and I believe you may be precisely the person who can provide it." Amelia's hand tightened on her reticule, propriety warring with curiosity. "I cannot imagine how I might assist a gentleman of your station, my lord." "Walk with me," he said, gesturing toward a tea shop across the street. "5 minutes of your time. I promise you will find the proposition worth your consideration." Every instinct warned her to refuse. A proper lady did not entertain propositions from strange men, no matter how refined their appearance. Yet proper ladies had families to protect them, homes to shelter them, futures that extended beyond 3 shillings and 6 pence. 5 minutes, she agreed, allowing him to guide her across the wet street. The tea shop offered warmth and the comforting scent of bergamot. Lord Ashford secured a table in the corner, away from prying ears, and ordered tea with the ease of one accustomed to being obeyed. When the serving girl departed, he leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I shall be direct, Miss Hartwell. I am in need of a wife. Not a true wife, but the appearance of one. For 6 months, perhaps a year. In exchange, I am prepared to offer you £10,000. The number was so absurd that Amelia nearly laughed. £10,000, more than her father had earned in his entire career as a country vicar, more than she could hope to see in 10 lifetimes of governess work, if indeed anyone would hire a woman without references or connections. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I am entirely serious." He withdrew a leather document case from his coat. "I have inheritance at stake, Miss Hartwell. My uncle's will stipulates that I must be married before my 31st birthday, which falls in precisely 6 months and 3 days. Without a wife, the estate passes to my cousin, a man whose cruelty and wasteful nature would see generations of careful stewardship destroyed within a year." "But surely you could find a genuine bride among the ton," Amelia protested. "Why would you need to engage in such deception?" His jaw tightened. "Because I have no intention of being trapped in a loveless marriage for the rest of my life. I have seen what such unions create. The bitterness, the resentment, the slow death of hope. I will fulfill the letter of my uncle's absurd requirement and then resume my life as I see fit." The tea arrived, steam rising from delicate china cups. Amelia's cold fingers wrapped around the warmth gratefully. "And what would be required of me?" "You would live in my London townhouse as Lady Ashford. We would attend select social functions together, enough to establish the validity of our marriage. but not so many as to invite excessive scrutiny. After the inheritance is secured and sufficient time has passed, we would arrange a quiet separation. You would be provided with a generous settlement and references that would allow you to begin a new life wherever you choose. And if we are discovered? The question emerged shakily. If someone reveals the deception, then we are both ruined, he acknowledged with brutal honesty. I lose the inheritance and you face scandal. But I have investigated your circumstances, Miss Hartwell. Forgive the intrusion into your privacy, but I needed to ensure I was approaching someone with no connections to society who might recognize the fraud. You are alone without family or prospects. What I offer is survival with dignity, or the alternative. He did not need to elaborate on the alternative. Amelia knew it well. The workhouse, the street, or worse, the fate that awaited women with no money and no protection in Victorian England's unforgiving landscape. Why me? She asked. Surely there are other women equally desperate. Because I watched you 3 days ago at your mother's funeral. His voice softened slightly. You stood at that graveside with your back straight and your head high, even as the vicar rushed through the service as if poverty were contagious. You have dignity, Miss Hartwell, and courage. Those qualities cannot be purchased or feigned. They are precisely what I require. The rain drummed against the windows, each drop a tick of the clock counting down the hours until her landlady demanded payment she could not provide. £10,000, freedom, security, a chance to build a life beyond mere survival. If I agree, she said slowly, I would have conditions of my own. Interest flickered in his grey eyes. Name them. Separate chambers. No expectations beyond public appearances. And a legal document guaranteeing the settlement regardless of the success of your inheritance claim. Agreed on all counts. He extended his hand across the table. Do we have a bargain, Miss Hartwell? She looked at his outstretched hand, at the fine leather gloves and the gold signet ring bearing his family crest. This was madness, dangerous, improper, likely to end in disaster. Yet what was propriety to a woman standing on the edge of destitution? We have a bargain, Lord Ashford. She placed her hand in his, sealing a contract that would change everything. Neither of them noticed the serving girl lingering near the kitchen door, her eyes sharp with interest as she memorized every word spoken between the desperate lord and the desperate lady. The wedding took place 3 days later in a small parish church on the outskirts of London, witnessed by 2 hired strangers who signed the register for a shilling each. The vicar, elderly and dim-sighted, mumbled through the ceremony with indifferent haste. No music played, no flowers adorned the altar, no family stood in joyful witness. Amelia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, the ivory silk yellowed with age, but still beautiful in its simplicity. Julian appeared in formal attire, his expression carved from stone as he repeated vows that meant nothing to either of them. Do you, Julian Marcus Ashford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. The words fell like coins into a collection plate, currency for a transaction. And do you, Amelia Rose Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She hesitated, one final moment of doubt before the precipice. Then she thought of the cold streets, the leering landlord, the future that held nothing but shadows. I do. The vicar pronounced them man and wife with the same enthusiasm he might announce a funeral. Julian's lips brushed her cheek in a perfunctory kiss, cold and quick as frost. Then it was done. She was Lady Amelia Ashford, a title built on lies and necessity. The townhouse in Mayfair stood imposing and elegant, all white stone and gleaming windows that reflected the winter sun. Servants lined the entrance hall as Julian introduced her, their faces carefully neutral, though Amelia sensed their speculation. The sudden marriage of their bachelor lord to an unknown woman would fuel below-stairs gossip for weeks. "Mrs. Patterson will show you to your chambers," Julian said, his tone formal as if addressing a stranger rather than the woman he had wed hours before. "I have business to attend to. We dine at 8. He departed without another word, leaving Amelia to follow the housekeeper up a grand staircase adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashford ancestors. The chambers prepared for her were beautiful beyond anything she had imagined, all silk wallpaper and velvet drapes, a 4-poster bed draped in crimson, and windows overlooking a private garden. "His lordship's chambers adjoin yours through that door," Mrs. Patterson said, indicating a painted panel in the wall, "though he has instructed it remain locked unless you wish otherwise." The meaning was clear. This was to be a marriage in name only, as promised. Relief and something else, something she dared not examine too closely, warred in Amelia's chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That will be all." When the housekeeper departed, Amelia moved to the window, watching London stretch before her in all its sooty grandeur. Somewhere in this vast city, her mother lay in a pauper's grave. Somewhere the boarding-house landlady cursed the tenant who had fled without paying, and here in this gilded cage she stood as Lady Ashford, playing a role in a drama whose ending remained unwritten. That evening she descended to the dining room in the best of her meagre dresses, a gown of grey merino that had seen better days. Julian stood as she entered, his eyes registering the worn fabric but making no comment. They dined in near silence, the clink of silver against china, the only conversation. Finally, as the servants cleared the third course, Julian spoke. "There is a ball next week at the Duchess of Marlborough's residence. We shall attend. It will serve to introduce you to society and establish our marriage publicly." Panic fluttered in Amelia's throat. "I have no suitable gown, my lord. Nothing appropriate for such an occasion. I have engaged a modiste. She will call tomorrow with fabrics and patterns. Spare no expense. You must appear as befits Lady Ashford." "And what manner of lady is that?" The question emerged more sharply than intended. His gaze met hers across the expanse of mahogany table. "One who is neither ashamed nor apologetic. We have entered this arrangement by mutual consent, Miss Lady Ashford. Neither of us need bear the burden of shame for choices made in the face of necessity." There was something in his voice, an understanding that surprised her. Perhaps he too felt the weight of their deception pressing against his conscience. "I shall do my best not to disgrace you," she said quietly. "I have no doubt of it." He rose, signaling the meal's end. "I bid you good evening." She watched him go, this stranger who was now her husband, and wondered what circumstance had driven a wealthy lord to such desperate measures. What secrets lay behind his controlled facade? And why did the sight of his broad shoulders disappearing through the doorway leave her feeling unexpectedly alone? The week passed in a flurry of preparation. The modiste arrived with her assistants, transforming Amelia's chambers into a workshop of silk and satin. Gowns materialized like magic, cut in the latest fashion, with necklines that made her blush and waist cinched to emphasize curves she hadn't known she possessed. "His lordship has exquisite taste," the modiste observed, pinning a hem. "He selected this sapphire silk himself, said it would match your eyes." Amelia glanced at the shimmering fabric. Julian had noticed the color of her eyes. She had assumed he barely registered her existence beyond her utility to his scheme. The dancing master appeared next, hired to ensure she could navigate a ballroom without stumbling. Though her father had taught her the basic steps in their country parsonage, London society demanded polish she did not possess. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The instructor counted as she moved through the waltz steps, his patience thinning as she stumbled repeatedly. "Lady Ashford, you must allow your partner to lead." Perhaps if she had a better partner than a counting stick. Julian's voice came from the doorway. He had been absent for most of the week, conducting business that kept him away until late evening. Now he entered the drawing room where she practiced, loosening his cravat with casual grace. "My lord," the instructor bowed, "I was merely attempting to perfect her ladyship's technique, and succeeding in making her as rigid as a board." Julian dismissed the man with a gesture. "Leave us." When the instructor departed with wounded dignity, Julian turned to Amelia. "May I?" He offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his palm. He drew her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with surprising gentleness. "The secret to the waltz," he murmured, "is trust. You must trust your partner to guide you, and in return, he must be worthy of that trust." He began to move, and Amelia found herself following without thought, her feet finding the rhythm as if they had always known it. Around the drawing room they turned, the gas lamps blurring into streaks of gold. For the first time since their wedding, she felt his full attention upon her, his grey eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are a natural," he said, as the imaginary music faded. "Why did you struggle so with the instructor?" "Perhaps because he was not you," she replied, then immediately regretted the words. Too honest, too revealing. But Julian merely smiled, a rare expression that transformed his severe features. "Then I shall be your partner tomorrow night, and we shall astonish the Duchess's guests with our coordination." He released her, stepping back to restore propriety. "The sapphire gown will do nicely. Wear the Ashford diamonds. They belong to my mother, and she would have approved of you wearing them." "You speak of her in past tense," Amelia observed. "Has she passed?" A shadow crossed his face. 5 years ago, she and my father both in a carriage accident during a storm. I was serving in India at the time. By the time I returned, they were long buried. "I am sorry for your loss." The words felt inadequate, but his brief expression of grief stirred something in her chest. They shared this, at least the pain of loving and losing. "As I am for yours." His gaze held hers. "We both know the weight of absence." In that moment, something shifted between them. Not affection, not yet, but recognition. Two people who had each suffered loss, who had each been driven by circumstance to a desperate gamble, now bound together in a pretense that felt increasingly real with each passing day. "Until tomorrow evening, then, Lady Ashford." He bowed formally, restoring the distance. "Until tomorrow, Lord Ashford." That night, lying in her bedchambers with the locked door between them, Amelia heard him pacing in the adjacent room, back and forth, like a caged animal seeking escape. What burdens kept him wakeful? What fears drove him to this elaborate deception? She pressed her hand against the painted panel separating their rooms, feeling the solid wood beneath her palm. So close, and yet an uncrossable distance remained between them. A distance mandated by their contract, protected by mutual agreement. Yet something within her whispered that distance was growing smaller with each shared glance, each unexpected conversation. And she was not entirely certain that terrified or exhilarated her more. The Duchess of Marlborough's ballroom blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames reflected in gilt-framed mirrors that lined the walls. The cream of London society swirled across polished floors, a sea of silk and jewels, of whispered confidences and calculated glances. Amelia stood at the entrance on Julian's arm, feeling every eye turn toward them. The sapphire gown clung to her figure like liquid moonlight, and the Ashford diamonds at her throat caught the light, throwing rainbows across her skin. She had never felt so beautiful or so fraudulent. "Steady," Julian murmured, his hand tightening on hers. "Remember, you are Lady Ashford. You belong here as much as any of them." But the whispers had already begun, rippling through the assembly like wind through wheat. "Who is she? I've never seen her before." "Lord Ashford married." "Impossible. He swore he'd never take a wife." "She looks like a country mouse dressed in borrowed finery." Each word struck like a physical blow, but Amelia kept her chin high, remembering Julian's counsel. Neither ashamed nor apologetic. She had survived her mother's death, her own destitution, the stark terror of facing London's streets alone. She could survive the sneers of people who had never known true hardship. "Lord Ashford!" A woman materialized before them, all ostrich feathers and supercilious smiles. "What a delightful surprise. We had quite despaired of seeing you in society this season." "Lady Pemberton." Julian's bow was precisely calculated, polite but cool. "May I present my wife, Lady Amelia Ashford?" The woman's eyes narrowed, assessing Amelia from head to toe with the precision of a jeweler examining a paste diamond. "Your wife? How extraordinary. I had not heard of any engagement." "It was a private affair." Julian's tone warned against further inquiry. "We saw no need for excessive fanfare." "How romantic." The words dripped with sarcasm. "You must call upon me, Lady Ashford. I shall be delighted to introduce you to the ladies of our circle." The threat beneath the courtesy was unmistakable. Amelia forced a smile. "How kind of you, Lady Pemberton. I shall look forward to it." As the woman drifted away, Amelia caught Julian's wry glance. "She will have us investigated by morning," he said quietly. "Pemberton is notorious for ferreting out scandal. Then she will find a perfectly legal marriage certificate, properly witnessed and recorded." Amelia's voice held more confidence than she felt. "What scandal can she uncover in that?" "None, if fortune favors us." But worry shadowed his eyes. The music began, a waltz that drew couples onto the floor. Julian turned to her, extending his hand with the same gesture he had used in the drawing room. "Shall we give them something to talk about?" They moved into the dance, and once again Amelia found herself caught in the spell of his guidance. He was an excellent dancer, leading her through the turns and swirls with an ease that made her forget her nervousness. Around them, the other couples blurred into insignificance. "You are doing wonderfully," he murmured, his breath warm against her temple. "Every eye in the room is upon you, and they see exactly what I hoped they would see." "And what is that?" she dared to ask. "A lady worthy of the Ashford name." His hand at her waist drew her fractionally closer. "A woman of grace and dignity who has captured the attention of a man thought immune to matrimony." "All an illusion," she reminded him, even as her heart beat faster. "The best illusions contain a kernel of truth." His grey eyes held hers. "You have proven yourself far more than I anticipated, Amelia. I find myself grateful that fortune led me to that bookshop doorway." The use of her given name, spoken so softly that none but she could hear, sent warmth flooding through her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine this was real, that she was truly Lady Ashford, beloved wife of a devoted husband, that the hand at her waist held her not from duty, but from desire. Then the music ended, and the spell broke. Julian stepped back, releasing her to the scrutiny of 100 watching eyes. A gentleman approached, requesting an introduction, then another, and soon Amelia found herself swept into the current of society, answering the same questions repeatedly, with carefully rehearsed responses. Where had they met? At a mutual acquaintance gathering. Why the haste to marry? When one finds true affection, why delay? What were her family connections? Her father had been a country vicar, deceased these past 2 years. Her mother more recently lost to illness. The lies fell from her lips with distressing ease, each one smoothly delivered, each one another brick in the wall of their deception. By evening's end, her cheeks ached from smiling, and her head throbbed from the constant vigilance required to maintain her performance. In the carriage, returning home, she sagged against the velvet cushions, exhaustion claiming her. "I feel as though I have run a marathon," she confessed. "You were magnificent." Julian sat across from her, his face half-shadowed by the passing street lamps. "Every inch the lady. I could not have asked for a better performance." "A performance?" she echoed, the word tasting bitter. "Yes, that is precisely what it was." Silence fell between them, broken only by the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Amelia closed her eyes, willing away the foolish disappointment that had settled in her chest. She had no right to feel hurt by the reminder that this was business, nothing more. They had an agreement, terms clearly stated, a contract binding them only until his inheritance was secured. Yet his hand, finding hers in the darkness, surprised her, his fingers laced through hers, warm and solid and real. "It was a performance," he said quietly, "but not entirely. I meant what I said. You are worthy of the name you now bear, and I am grateful, more than you know." She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression she could not decipher. In the dim light he looked younger, the harsh lines of his face softened, vulnerability replacing the armor he typically wore. "Julian," she began, then stopped, uncertain what she meant to say. "We should rest," he said, releasing her hand as the carriage drew to a halt before the townhouse. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." He was right, of course. Yet as they parted in the upstairs hallway, each retreating to separate chambers, Amelia found herself pressing her hand against the locked door between them once more. On the other side, she heard him moving about, preparing for bed, so close and yet impossibly distant. And for the first time since their arrangement began, she wondered what might happen if that door were ever to open. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Julian and Amelia appeared together at carefully selected social events, just visible enough to establish the legitimacy of their marriage, not so prominent as to invite excessive scrutiny. They attended the opera, where Amelia discovered Julian's love of music and his surprisingly fine singing voice as he hummed along with the arias. They rode in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, where his protection from over-eager suitors amused rather than annoyed her. They hosted a small dinner party, where Amelia's natural warmth and unaffected manner charmed even the most skeptical guests. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the distance between them began to narrow. It started with small things. Julian began joining her for breakfast, their conversation shifting from stilted formality to easy discourse on topics ranging from politics to literature. She discovered his passion for social reform, his genuine concern for the plight of London's poor, work he funded quietly without seeking recognition or praise. "Why keep it secret?" she asked one morning over tea. "Surely your charitable work would enhance your reputation." "Because the moment it becomes about reputation," he replied, "it ceases to be about charity. The work matters, not the recognition." She found herself admiring him for this, for the principled man beneath the aristocratic exterior, and she caught him watching her sometimes when he thought her attention elsewhere, his expression thoughtful and unguarded. 3 months into their arrangement, winter gave way to early spring. Amelia sat in the morning room, attempting to master the embroidery that society ladies were expected to produce, when Julian entered with uncharacteristic abruptness. "I have received word from my uncle's solicitors," he announced without preamble. "The inheritance review has been moved forward. They will conduct their investigation next week." Amelia set down her needle, anxiety tightening her chest. So soon. My cousin has challenged the will's execution. He claims our marriage is fraudulent, contracted solely to circumvent the inheritance stipulation. Julian's jaw worked tensely. The solicitors must verify the legitimacy of our union before releasing the estate. How will they verify it? The question emerged barely above a whisper. By observing us, by interviewing the household staff, by examining every detail of our life together for evidence of deception. His gaze met hers. Amelia, they will be looking for proof that we are not truly man and wife. The implications hung heavy between them. If investigators concluded their marriage was a sham, Julian would lose everything, and she would be revealed as complicit in fraud, facing scandal and possible legal consequences. What should we do? She asked. He moved to the window, shoulders rigid with tension. We must appear as we have been, cordial, comfortable in each other's company, but we may need to demonstrate greater intimacy. Intimacy? Her voice rose slightly. Not that, he said quickly, turning to face her, but perhaps we should be seen together more frequently within the house. The locked door between our chambers should be opened, in case servants notice. We must give the appearance of a marriage in truth, not merely in name. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. The locked door had been her protection, her assurance that the boundaries of their arrangement would be maintained. Without it, what separated pretense from reality? I understand, she said, forcing calm into her voice. I shall instruct my maid to have the door unbolted. Thank you. Relief washed across his features. I know this ask is beyond our original agreement. If we succeed, I shall increase your settlement by half again. I do not want more money. The words emerged more vehemently than intended. I want to honor our contract and see you receive what is rightfully yours. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. You are generous, Amelia, more generous than I deserve. That night, when her maid departed after helping her prepare for bed, Amelia stared at the door that now stood unlocked. Beyond it, she heard Julian moving in his chamber, the soft sounds of domesticity that had become familiar. Her hand rose toward the painted panel, hovering inches from the wood. What lay beyond this barrier? Not just a room, but a frontier she had carefully avoided crossing. If she opened this door, if she stepped across the threshold into his space, would she be able to retreat again to the safe distance of their arrangement? Before courage could desert her, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. Julian stood by his fireplace, still dressed save for his jacket and cravat, a book in his hands. He looked up at the sound, surprise, and something else crossing his features. Amelia, he said, setting the book aside. Is something wrong? She stepped fully into his chamber, acutely aware of her nightdress and robe, of her unbound hair falling past her shoulders. This was improper by every standard she had been raised to honor, yet here she stood. I thought, she began, then paused, gathering her thoughts. If investigators will be watching, scrutinizing our every interaction, perhaps we should become more comfortable in each other's presence, less formal, more like an actual married couple. Understanding dawned in his eyes. That is practical thinking. May I sit? She gestured to the chairs flanking the fireplace. Of course, this is your home as much as mine. She settled into the chair, tucking her feet beneath her in a manner that would scandalize any matron of the ton. Julian took the opposite seat, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the space. Tell me something true, Amelia said. Not part of our performance, not calculated for effect. Something real about yourself. He leaned back, considering. I am terrified of failure, he said at last. Not the loss of wealth, that matters little, but the loss of purpose. My family's estate supports nearly 200 tenant families. The investments I manage provide employment for thousands. If it falls to my cousin, he will bleed it dry within months. All those people who depend on the Ashford legacy will suffer. That is what drives you, she said softly. Not greed, but responsibility. And you? He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Tell me something true about Amelia Hartwell. She hesitated, then chose vulnerability over safety. I am terrified of invisibility, of becoming so small and insignificant that I simply disappear from the world without leaving any mark of my existence. When my mother died, I realized that we had lived so quietly, so carefully, that almost no one noticed we were gone. I fear a life that vanishes without echo. You could never be invisible. His voice held quiet conviction. You have a light within you, Amelia. I saw it that first day in the rain, standing with nothing, but refusing to surrender your dignity. It drew me to you then, and it grows brighter each day I know you. Tears pricked her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Do not say such things, she whispered. It makes it harder to remember this is temporary. Is it? He rose, crossing to kneel beside her chair. Amelia, what if? He stopped himself, jaw clenching as though biting back words that demanded release. What if what? She dared to ask. What if we did not have to pretend? The words emerged rough with emotion. What if this marriage, begun as contract, might become something more? Her breath caught. Julian, you cannot mean. I mean that I find myself thinking of you at odd hours, that I listen for your footsteps in the hall, that the thought of you leaving, of this arrangement ending, fills me with a sense of loss I have no right to feel. His hand covered hers where it rested on the chair arm. I know this was not our bargain, but somewhere between the performance and the pretense, something changed for me, and I thought perhaps it might have changed for you as well. Amelia stared at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers smaller but no less certain. Everything within her screamed caution. He offered no guarantee, no assurance that this confession was more than momentary sentiment brought on by the stress of the impending investigation. If she allowed herself to hope, to trust, and then he withdrew or dismissed his words as foolishness, she would be left with a broken heart and nowhere to direct her grief. Yet had she not already begun to hope? Had she not lain awake nights thinking of him, wondering what life might be if their arrangement were real? Had she not caught herself watching him across dinner tables, hungry for his attention, his approval, his regard? It has changed for me as well, she confessed, the words emerging barely above a whisper. I did not mean for it to. I tried to guard against it. But somewhere between the waltzes and the morning conversations, between the locked door and this moment, I have become far too attached to a situation I knew was temporary. Then let us make it permanent. He rose, drawing her to her feet, not for the investigators, not for the inheritance, but for ourselves. Amelia Hartwell, will you marry me truly? Will you become my wife, not in name only, but in heart and intention? She looked up into his face, seeing hope and fear warring in his grey eyes. We are already married, she reminded him. In law, yes. But I ask you now to marry me in truth, to take the contract we signed and transform it into a covenant, to replace pretense with promise. Tears spilled down her cheeks, unstoppable now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Julian, I will marry you in truth. He gathered her into his arms, and for the first time since their wedding day, his lips met hers with genuine feeling, not the perfunctory brush of that ceremony, but a real kiss, tender and searching, filled with promise and possibility. Amelia melted into his embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart pounding a rhythm that sang of relief and joy, and the terrifying wonder of being truly seen. When they finally parted, both breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "I do not deserve you," he murmured. "Perhaps not," she agreed, a smile breaking through her tears, "but you have me nonetheless." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the fire burned low, two people who had begun as strangers, bound by necessity, now choosing to remain bound by affection. The locked door stood open behind them, no longer a barrier but a threshold crossed. Though challenges remained, though the investigation still loomed, and the future held no guarantees, in that moment they were simply Julian and Amelia, two hearts that had found each other in the midst of deception and emerged with something achingly real. The investigators arrived on a grey morning, 1 week later. Three stern-faced gentlemen in dark suits who moved through the townhouse with clipboards and calculating eyes, interviewing servants, examining records, observing with uncomfortable attention every interaction between Lord and Lady Ashford. Amelia had thought herself prepared for the scrutiny. She and Julian had spent the intervening week deepening their intimacy, taking meals together, sitting close in the drawing room as they read, even strolling the garden with his arm around her waist. The gestures that had once felt performative now carried genuine warmth. They were no longer pretending, and she prayed that authenticity would shine through. Yet, the lead investigator, a Mr. Grimsby with narrow eyes and a disposition to match his name, seemed determined to find fault. He questioned Amelia about the particulars of their courtship, probing for inconsistencies in the story they had rehearsed. "And where precisely did you meet Lord Ashford, Lady Ashford?" "At a gathering of mutual acquaintances," she replied smoothly, the lie coming easier with practice. "The name of these acquaintances?" "I'm afraid I cannot recall. It was a large party and I met so many people." His pen scratched across paper, recording what she knew he interpreted as evasion. "And the circumstances of your father's death?" "He passed 2 years ago. My mother more recently." "Convenient that they cannot verify your account." The words were delivered with clinical coldness. Anger flared in Amelia's chest, but she maintained composure. "I assure you, sir, there is nothing convenient about being orphaned." Julian appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Mr. Grimsby, I must object to your line of questioning. Lady Ashford's family history has no bearing on the legitimacy of our marriage." "On the contrary, Lord Ashford." Grimsby turned his narrow gaze on Julian. "The timing of your marriage, following so closely upon Miss Hartwell's loss of family and resources, suggests a transaction rather than a love match. One might conclude that a desperate woman accepted a business arrangement disguised as matrimony. One might conclude that a compassionate man encountered a woman in distress and offered honorable marriage rather than see her forced into poverty." Julian's voice was cold as winter steel. "Unless you would prefer I had left her to the streets?" "I prefer evidence of genuine affection rather than charitable pity." Grimsby stood, gathering his papers. "I shall return tomorrow to continue my investigation. I suggest you both prepare more convincing answers." When the investigators departed, Amelia found herself trembling with delayed reaction. "He will never be satisfied," she said, sinking onto the drawing-room sofa. "He has decided we are frauds, and nothing we say will change his mind." Julian knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Then we shall give him proof beyond words." "What proof can we offer that he will not dismiss as performance?" "The proof of truth." Julian's thumbs stroked across her knuckles. "Amelia, what if we told him the truth?" "All of it." She stared at him, shocked. "You cannot be serious. If we confess the deception, you lose everything." "Or," he countered, We explain how a contract marriage became real, how two people who began as strangers discovered genuine love amid pretense. That is not fraud, Amelia. That is transformation. It is also a risk. Fear made her voice sharp. What if he does not believe us? What if he sees our confession as merely another layer of deception? Then we face the consequences together. His grip tightened. But I will not build our future on continued lies. I have lied enough. To society, to my family's solicitors, even to myself about the nature of my feelings for you. I am done with pretense. She studied his face, seeing the determination there, the integrity that had drawn her to him from the start. You would truly risk everything. I already have. His hand rose to cup her cheek. The moment I fell in love with you, I risked everything. The inheritance, the estate, my reputation, none of it matters if I cannot have you beside me honestly. Tears blurred her vision. You are either the bravest man I have known or the most foolish. Perhaps both. A wry smile curved his lips. Will you stand with me in this? She thought of the girl who had stood in the rain 3 months prior, desperate and alone, willing to sell herself into a false marriage for survival. She thought of the woman she had become, loved and valued, no longer invisible but seen and cherished, and she knew there was only one answer she could give. I will stand with you. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Whatever comes, we face it together. That night, they made love for the first time, not as husband and wife fulfilling marital duty, but as two people choosing each other freely. Julian was tender and patient, his hands reverent as they learned the landscape of her body, and when they joined, it was with the full knowledge that they offered not just physical connection, but emotional surrender, the complete vulnerability of two souls laying bare before each other. Later, as she lay in his arms with dawn painting the sky beyond the windows, Amelia traced idle patterns across his chest. Whatever happens with the inheritance, she said softly, I want you to know I do not regret this, any of this. Nor I. He pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. You saved me, Amelia. Not with the marriage certificate, but with your courage, your kindness, your refusal to become bitter despite all you have suffered. You taught me that love is not trap, but liberation. She tilted her head to look up at him. And you taught me that I am worthy of being seen, of taking up space in the world, of mattering to someone beyond my utility. They held each other as morning light grew stronger, gathering strength for the confrontation ahead. When Mr. Grimsby returned with his fellow investigators the following afternoon, Julian and Amelia met them in the library, hands linked, united in purpose. Gentlemen, Julian began without preamble. Lady Ashford and I have decided to speak plainly about the circumstances of our marriage. Grimsby's eyes gleamed with triumph. So you admit to deception? I admit to beginning this union as a business arrangement. Julian's voice remained steady. I required a wife to fulfill my uncle's will. Miss Hartwell required resources and protection. We entered into marriage with clear contractual terms, treating it as a transaction rather than a romantic union. Pens scratched across paper. Grimsby's expression radiated vindication. Then you acknowledge the marriage is fraudulent? No. Amelia spoke up, her voice clear and strong. We acknowledge that it began as contract. What it became was something else entirely. She turned to Julian, finding courage in his steady gaze before continuing. I was paid to pretend we were married. That much is true. But somewhere between the pretense and the performance, the act became real. I fell in love with my husband, and he, I am blessed to say, fell in love with me. What began as deception transformed into devotion. How convenient, Grimsby sneered. You expect us to believe this sudden profession of love? I expect you to investigate it as thoroughly as you have investigated everything else." Julian's tone turned commanding. "Interview our servants. They will tell you that in recent weeks, Lady Ashford and I have grown increasingly close, that the affection between us is evident to all who observe us. Examine our behavior at social engagements. Speak to those who have witnessed our interactions. You will find consistent evidence that this marriage, whatever its origins, has become genuine." One of the other investigators, a younger man with kinder eyes, leaned forward. "Lord Ashford, you understand that admitting the initial arrangement was contractual places the inheritance in jeopardy." "I understand that continuing to lie places my integrity in jeopardy," Julian replied. "I will not compromise my honor or my wife's dignity by maintaining a deception. My uncle's will required me to marry before my 31st birthday. I have done so. That the marriage evolved from practical arrangement to love match does not negate its legal validity." Grimsby sputtered protests, but the younger investigator raised a hand. "A moment, Mr. Grimsby." He turned to Amelia. "Lady Ashford, forgive the indelicacy of this question, but has your marriage been consummated?" Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks, but she met his gaze directly. "Yes, last night for the first time." "And before last night?" "Before last night, we maintained separate chambers and separate lives, honoring the terms of our agreement." She lifted her chin. "I entered this arrangement as Miss Hartwell, desperate and alone, but I stand before you now as Lady Ashford, beloved wife of a man I have chosen freely. Is that not what marriage should be? A choice to love, renewed daily." Silence fell across the library. Grimsby looked ready to argue further, but the younger investigator silenced him with a glance. "Lord Ashford, Lady Ashford," he said formally, "we require time to deliberate and consult with the other trustees of your uncle's will. We shall deliver our decision within the week." When the investigators departed, Amelia sagged against Julian, the adrenaline that had sustained her draining away. "Did we make a terrible mistake?" she whispered. "No." His arms tightened around her. "We made the only choice that honored both the letter and spirit of my uncle's will. He wanted me to marry, to find a partner, to build a life. We have done precisely that, simply not in the order he might have imagined. And if they rule against us, then we begin again." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "Together, I meant what I said, Amelia. I would rather have you and nothing else than an inheritance built on continued deception." She kissed him then, pouring into that gesture all the love and gratitude and fierce determination that filled her heart. They had chosen honesty over security, truth over advantage, and whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced Grimsby, united, unashamed, and unafraid. The week of waiting stretched endlessly. Julian threw himself into work, managing estate business from his study, while Amelia busied herself with correspondence and calls from society ladies who had begun to accept her as one of their own. Yet beneath the routine of daily life, tension hummed like a plucked string. On the 5th day, a messenger arrived bearing an official-looking envelope. Julian opened it with steady hands, though Amelia noted the slight tremor that betrayed his nerves. She stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, offering silent support as he read. His expression revealed nothing as his eyes scanned the page. Then, slowly, a smile began to form, transforming his features with such joy that Amelia's breath caught. "We have won," he said, voice rough with emotion. "The trustees have ruled in our favor. The inheritance is secured." Amelia clutched his arm, disbelief and relief flooding through her. "Truly," he read aloud, "upon thorough investigation we find that while the marriage of Lord and Lady Ashford began as an arrangement of mutual convenience, it has evolved into a genuine union characterized by affection and commitment. The letter of the deceased's will required marriage before Lord Ashford's 31st birthday. The spirit of the will desired that Lord Ashford form a lasting partnership. Both requirements have been met. The inheritance is hereby released to Lord Julian Ashford without restriction. He looked up from the page, eyes bright. We did it. Amelia, your courage, your honesty, they have saved everything. Not I, she corrected, tears spilling down her cheeks. We, together. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her in a circle as laughter, rich and unrestrained, poured from him. When he set her down, his kiss was fierce and claiming, a seal upon their victory and their love. I have a confession, he said when they finally parted. I have already instructed my solicitor to prepare new documents. New documents? For your settlement. The terms of our original agreement promised you £10,000 upon the conclusion of our arrangement. But as our arrangement is now permanent, the amount seemed inadequate. Amelia shook her head. Julian, I do not need. Nevertheless, you shall have it. £50,000, placed in trust in your name, to do with as you wish, your independence assured, so you may never question whether you remain with me from choice or necessity. The generosity of it stole her words. That is too much. It is barely a fraction of what you have given me. His hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. You gave me a reason to live beyond duty. You gave me hope, joy, companionship, love. How does one place a value on that? You cannot, she whispered, leaning into his touch, because it is beyond price. That evening they hosted a celebration dinner, inviting the few friends who had supported them throughout the ordeal. As Amelia looked around the table at the smiling faces, at Julian's hand resting casually over hers, at the easy warmth that filled the room, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had stood in the rain, desperate and alone, agreeing to a fraudulent marriage out of sheer necessity. She had expected to play a role for a limited time, collect her payment, and disappear back into obscurity. Instead, she had found a home, a purpose, a partner who saw her not as a transaction but as a treasure. She had discovered that the marks we leave on the world come not from grand gestures, but from quiet moments of courage, from choosing honesty over expedience, from allowing ourselves to be transformed by love, even when it terrifies us. Later that night, as they lay entwined in the bed they now shared, Julian traced idle patterns across her shoulder. I have been thinking, he said softly. Another dangerous pastime, she teased, echoing their earlier conversation. He smiled against her hair. Perhaps, but I wonder if you might humor me in one more arrangement. What manner of arrangement? She propped herself on one elbow to look down at him. A renewal of our vows. His eyes held hers. We spoke them once in a cold church before witnesses who cared nothing for their meaning. I would speak them again, here, now, with full knowledge of their weight. Will you marry me again, Amelia? Not for inheritance or survival, but simply because I love you and wish to pledge my life to yours. Fresh tears gathered in her eyes, but these were tears of joy, of completion. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. They spoke the words there in the candlelight, each promise weighted with meaning they had not possessed on that grey morning 6 months before. I, Julian Marcus Ashford, take you, Amelia Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. I, Amelia Rose Hartwell Ashford, take you, Julian Marcus, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. When they sealed their renewed vows with a kiss, it felt like both an ending and a beginning. The end of pretense, the beginning of authentic life together. As sleep began to claim them, Julian murmured against her hair, "Thank you for crying that day in the rain, for standing beneath that bookshop awning, for having courage enough to take a chance on a desperate stranger. Thank you for seeing me," she replied softly, "for paying me to pretend, and then loving me enough to make it real." He pulled her closer, and in the darkness, their hearts beat in synchrony. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had transformed contract into covenant, pretense into promise. The candles flickered and died, but their love, born of necessity and tempered by truth, burned bright and steady, a beacon that would guide them through all the years to come. 1 year later, Amelia stood in the nursery of Ashford Manor, their country estate, watching spring sunlight stream through windows onto walls painted soft yellow. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her abdomen, feeling the flutter of new life within. Julian entered behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Wool gathering, my love. Remembering," she said softly. "This time last year, I was standing in the rain with 3 shillings to my name, believing my life had ended. And now?" His hands covered hers over their unborn child. "Now I know it was only beginning." She turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had paid her to pretend, only to give her something infinitely more valuable, a life of truth, of love, of becoming more than she had ever imagined possible. "I love you, Amelia Ashford," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I love you, Julian Ashford. Not for what you gave me, but for who you helped me become." Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle and renewing. But inside Ashford Manor, 2 people who had once stood separate in storms now stood together, sheltered by love that had transformed contract into forever. And if somewhere in London a desperate woman stood beneath a bookshop awning, or a lonely lord searched for answers in the rain, may they find what Julian and Amelia discovered, that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with romance, but with courage, not with perfect circumstances, but with the willingness to risk, to trust, to allow pretense to become promise. For in the end, we are all searching for the same thing: to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone beyond our utility. And when we find that person, when we discover the one who looks past our defenses to the truth beneath, we find not just love, but the courage to become who we were always meant to be. What moment in Julian and Amelia's journey moved you most? Have you ever discovered that something that began as a necessity became your greatest gift? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. If this tale touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who believes that love can transform even the most desperate circumstances into something beautiful. Stay with us until the end for another emotional story that will continue this journey of the heart.